Workplace mobbing is the act of bullying others in the workplace on a regular basis by two or more individuals usually. These actions are negative, continuous, and tend to intensify over time. So mobbing is not a conflict that occurs in a single instance. However, it can have many forms and types. Workplace mobbing and workplace bullying can include professional, emotional, verbal, as well as physical abuses coming in a downward, upward, inward, and even horizontal forms. Now, more specifically, let me go ahead and talk a little bit about workplace mobbing behaviors. So bullying is included in workplace mobbing, but workplace mobbing has received less attention than the general concept of bullying. So in this article that was published in Business Ethics and Leadership Journal out of Ukraine, in their volume number 4, issue 1 of April 2020, we can see it is entitled Workplace Mobbing and the Role of Human Resources Management. This article is important for all of us as professionals, as workers, and as managers, but more specifically, there are recommendations for human resource managers in terms of policy making and training of all employees, including managers, to make sure that they're role modeling good behavior that is expected of everyone in the organization. Once again, as I always encourage everyone, read the abstract first to see how relevant this research might be for your specific research topic or study at a given time. In this study, the abstract says that workplace mobbing and bullying are the most pressing and urgent problems which employees, managers, and executives of most businesses can face in their day-to-day activities. The HR managers are responsible for the effectiveness of the processes in the workplace management and for protecting employees from unfair harassment and humiliation. The systematization of literary sources enabled us to make conclusions that the most common forms of workplace mobbing include the spreading of malicious gossip amid ridiculing and bullying the victim in a department or organization. It is quite often that a gossip is a malicious tool for distorting personal information that has nothing to do with the victim's professional competence. In an extreme case, such humiliations may be distributed beyond the office or scope of the employee's activity. So the purpose of the research is to investigate various forms of workplace mobbing as well as its impact on employees, their ability to work in a team, and their effective operation in the company. The article substantiates the role of the HR department in controlling workplace mobbing, the primary function of which is to support the company's or organization's ability to always improve its overall work efficiency. Given their job responsibilities, HR managers should focus on the legal, ethical, and socially responsible aspects of the company, on the implementation of the policy, which forms team relationships due to the principles of mutual respect and dignity under conditions of an inclusive work environment. Besides, managers can take measures to identify, to prevent, and to effectively resolve daily differences and conflicts promptly. The purpose of these activities is to help employees behave properly, rationally, and professionally, objectively adhering to policies and instructions, thereby creating a supportive workplace environment for all. The results of the research can be useful for HR managers to make sure all employees can work in a safe and healthy work environment. So that short description of the abstract is usually written once the paper is completed. So in this case, you see what the conclusions might be because of this research and what the literature might be pointing toward in terms of workplace mobbing and bullying in the workplace. In this article, you can actually see various forms of abuses. So the authors mentioned that the abuses could be physical, verbal, emotional, and professional. So in this visual of mobbing behavior types and forms, you can see that emotional abuses can be bullying, harassing, humiliating, excluding someone, even stonewalling someone. In professional types of abuse could include gossip, slander, intimidation, disrespect, and being rude to other colleagues or individuals in the workplace, or even outside of the workplace. So when these types of behaviors are present, that means either bullying or workplace mobbing is taking place, and you have to intervene to correct this problem from continuing to happen. If you cannot intervene professionally or effectively, then you have to report it to the Human Resources Department to make sure they take proper steps in reducing this or eliminating its negative impact in its continuation in the future. This article also gives you some terms and definitions that are related to mobbing in the workplace. You can see the term harassment, scapegoating, mobbing and psychological terror, health endangering leadership, petty tyranny, and bullying. So these are all definitions that are commonly understood in literature that is written on this topic. So if we look at the definition of mobbing, it says one or more persons repeated in enduring negative reactions and conducts targeted at one or more persons of their work group. So maybe the definition is very similar to other terminologies that are mentioned here, but keep in mind that when you're dealing with different forms and terminologies that are considered to be abusive behaviors, the definitions might slightly vary because the behaviors or the outcomes might be different. So it's good to see how other authors, how literature basically defines these, and then you have to clarify what you mean by the specific terminology in your writing. In this article also says that targets of workplace mobbing can be individuals who are different from the majority of their workers based on their gender, religion, sexual orientation, age, race, and or disability. Another type of target can be an individual that works hard, is kind to others, and non-confrontational, which are positive attributes, but a workplace bully disagrees and consequently will target that person. Individuals who are not confident or will not stick up for themselves is another targeted group for workplace mobbing. Some general examples of workplace mobbing can include slander, gossip, or spreading of rumors, disrespect, intimidating others, stonewalling, excluding, isolating, and ignoring, physical and verbal aggression, humiliation, yelling and screaming, making derogatory, biased, and inappropriate jokes in the workplace, setting impossible deadlines that will set up the target to fail, in tampering with the target's personal belongings in the workplace. So there are many different actions that can be classified as workplace bullying. For example, coworkers can spread rumors and gossip about the targeted employee that will discredit them. This type of misconduct will begin to make the work environment very uncomfortable for the victim. Bullies will orchestrate embarrassing, humiliating, and harassing experiences for the employee that can become so intense that they have to remove themselves from the environment. Victims can also be targeted by being isolated from others to the point where they feel as they do not have anyone that they can turn to. In sexual harassment and discrimination can also be considered workplace mobbing if multiple people are targeting one employee in the same manner. Of course, there are some suggestions as well. As a summary, some of the best practices and policies or recommendations for effectively dealing with workplace mobbing can include the following. 1. Remain watchful of any potential workplace mobbing encounters or behaviors. 2. Immediately address any unprofessional and inappropriate behaviors. 3. Keep detailed records and documentation of such cases and escalate and follow up accordingly. 4. Routinely remind everyone of the organization's expectations for all employees and supplement it with written manuals, training sessions, and signed agreements by both the employee and organizational managers. 5. Maintain open door and confidentiality policies. 6. Practice having an unbiased attitude and disposition in the workplace. 7. Know your expert or designated HR professional when coaching is needed. And number 8, maintain an inclusive workplace for all your employees. Managers and HR professionals should seek to eliminate workplace mobbing proactively and reactively. So when you're eliminating workplace mobbing proactively, means you have relevant policies in place to make sure nobody abuses an employee today, tomorrow, or next week in any department. Reactively simply means that if you see employees being abused or intimidated or harassed, you put in place relevant policies immediately after it has taken place so it doesn't get repeated, and you provide training and counseling for those employees, obviously immediately. Similar to preventing sexual harassment in the workplace, it is best to establish mandatory training for all managers and associates to create awareness and intolerance for bullying. There should be a hotline or some other anonymous channel to report suspected or experienced bullying. Guidelines should be well known and documented. Also, discipline should be quick, fair, and progressive to enforce the zero tolerance policy for workplace mobbing. So there are some very practical and relevant suggestions in this article that you can take as a worker, as an employee, or as a manager, or as a HR professional to make your workplace a safe workplace for all individuals that is free of bullying, harassment, abusive behaviors, misconducts, and obviously workplace mobbing. As a summary of this article, the authors mentioned that workplace mobbing can come in many forms, such as oral or verbal aggression, stonewalling, exclusion, gossip, slander, and physical aggression. Victims of psychological mobbing report a range of physical and psychological symptoms that can include headache, pain, depression, and even anxiety. If mobbing becomes acceptable in the workplace, other employees may fear that they could be a target next. This fear can lead to performance problems as well as anxiety for everyone. Employees could even see that their work environment is toxic and look for other places of employment. Businesses that allow workplace mobbing will eventually lose their best employees. Performance can also drop, which will cause the business to lose money and eventually go bankrupt. In some cases, the business could face a lawsuit from victims if managers and leaders fail to properly address incidents of workplace mobbing in a timely and effective manner. So good luck dealing with abusive behaviors, harassment, bullying, in workplace mobbing in all cases. So bullying behaviors obviously can land you in legal jeopardy, as well as the fact that you could have lower employee satisfaction, high employee turnover, and sometimes dissatisfied customers, because employees who bully each other, sometimes they might even bully the customer, and those customers are not likely to return back to your workplace. So when you're doing research, it's a good idea to get involved in academic journal articles that have been published based on empirical studies, in other words, based on data. One of those journal articles that talks about bullying is published in the Journal of Business Research. So this article here, you can see it is entitled Acceptability of Workplace Bullying, a Comparative Study on 6 Continents. You can see that we have authors and co-authors from many different countries. This research was initiated and led by Dr. Jacqueline Power out of Canada, and we initially began working on this actually when we met at the Academy of Management conference. And eventually, as co-authors, we collected data from our own countries, and I collected data actually from the United States related to people's views and perceptions associated with bullying. And eventually, we decided to write at least one paper dealing with showing how bullying is perceived in 6 different continents. So we wrote the paper and eventually revised it and edited and improved it, and then submitted for blind peer review. And eventually, after a couple of years, it was accepted and eventually published in the Journal of Business Research. So you can see that this article was published in volume 66 during 2013. It started on page 374. Now, as we're looking at this article, as I always recommend to all students, look at the abstract first. Try to read the abstract to see whether it relates to your research, whether it's something that might tell you you need to read most of the article to better understand it or not. If the abstract does not relate to your research, then you skip this article and read another one that is more closely associated with your topic, with your research. In this case, the abstract here says that this paper is the first to explore the impact of culture on the acceptability of workplace bullying, and to do so across a wide range of countries. Physically intimidating bullying is less acceptable than work-related bullying, both within groups of similar cultures and globally. Cultures with high performance orientation find bullying to be more acceptable, while those with high future orientation find bullying to be less acceptable. A high human orientation is associated with finding work-related bullying to be less acceptable. Confucian Asia finds work-related bullying to be more acceptable than the Anglo-Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa country clusters, and find physically intimidating bullying to be more acceptable than the Anglo and Latin America country clusters. The differences in the acceptability of bullying with respect to these cultures are partially explained in terms of cultural dimensions. So it is kind of interesting to see a cluster of different countries on this side and another cluster of countries on this side, and to see how they perceive workplace bullying. These questions obviously over time can be tested by many researchers to see whether the same results come true based on different studies with different populations within the same culture or country. And obviously you're trying to see whether the results produced in one study is valid and reliable across many different studies. But it would also be acceptable to understand the differences in how bullying is perceived across cultures, because when you're working with managers from across cultures, they might be demonstrating behaviors that are not necessarily seen as intimidating or bullying behaviors in his or her culture. So therefore, you have to understand their perspective before you accuse them of bullying. So there might be an opportunity for cross-cultural communication on both sides. So you'll learn a little bit more about their culture, and you also explain a little bit more about your culture to the person who is demonstrating certain behaviors that may not be acceptable in your culture. So not only we need to have an open mind, but we need to educate each other in order for us not to be abusive to the other person in the workplace. We don't want to be abused. We do not want any other people to be abused or perceive bullying behaviors based on cultural differences. So overall, this study gives you some conclusions based on several hypotheses that were tested and analyzed with the data that we got from 6 different continents. So you're welcome to read it to understand cultural differences with the acceptability of bullying across continents. As always, obviously, you can look at all of these references that are available to you to support your literature research and to better understand these topics. So good luck dealing with abusive behaviors, harassment, bullying in workplace, mobbing in all cases.